and gentlemen, and welcome to ASSOCHAM initiative. Thank you for being with us as we look forward to deliberation of this significant program. In a time where climate risk and pandemics have an impact on our lives and work, environment and social governance has gained great significance among investors, regulators, international agencies, and the private sector worldwide. The focal point of this webinar is to highlight sustainable practices that would translate to greater social credibility and build stronger community. We are optimistic that the discussions of the webinar would lead to a better understanding and implementation of the ESG issues for further action for posterity and shall provide necessary inputs for subsequent meets on ESG and climate and carbon neutrality. We are privileged and honored. We are being joined by Dr. Sujit Kumar Bajpayee, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of India. Welcome, sir. I'm also being joined by Mr. Karan Agarwal, Co-Chairman, ASSOCHAM National Council for SEZs and IT Park. I'm also joined by Mr. A.S. Narula, Director, GIS Group and Edupreneur, who has been supporting institutional learning of the concept. And as a keynote speaker, we have Mr. Chandok representing RPG Sanjeev Goenka Group. To deliberate on how corporate performance in the management of environment, social and governance links to sustainable economic development in India, we are joined by a panel of experts. The program is split into two parts, and in the second part, we have a panel discussion where our industry and academia experts shall share their thoughts. I take this pleasure to share with you our eminent panelists of today who represent the corporate side. We have Mr. Sujit Bose. He's the Associate Vice President at Hindustan Coca-Cola Beverages India, and he oversees ESG, climate and circulatory initiative from an internal controls perspective. We have Ms. Alka Upadhyay, who is Assistant Vice President, Tata Sons. She leads the environment and sustainability practices of Tata Sustainability Group and is responsible for research, consultancy and policy development for the Tata Group in climate change, environment and sustainability arena. We are joined by Mr. Rajiv Kumar. He's the Chief Risk Officer at Bajaj Allianz General Insurance and is responsible for coordinating with the risk owners in order to mitigate enterprise level risks. We have Mr. Amit Talgeri. He's the Chief Risk Officer of Axis Bank and has been active member of steering committee on ESG for the bank and represents the bank in various regulatory industry forums. We are also joined by Mr. Mitesh Pandya, Chief Sustainability Officer, Aluminium Sector for Vedanta Limited. From the knowledge and the academia side, we have Dr. Shantanu Chaudhary. He is the Director of IIT Jodhpur and is a Fellow of Indian National Academy for Engineers and the National Academy of Sciences. Professor Chaudhary has about 300 publications in peer-reviewed journals and conference proceedings with 15 patents and 4 books to his credit. We have specialists with us who are from the support domain. We are joined by Mr. Shailesh Tyagi. He is the Partner ESG, Decarbonization and Safety Transformation for Ernst & Young. He has the expertise and have been supporting several organizations. We are also joined by Mr. Shankar R, who is the Executive Director for Future Station Advisories and has led the ESG journey at Indian and global organization as Global Head of Sustainability Reporting at pharma such as Dr. Reddy, Pfizer, and several other organizations from the manufacturing domain. We shall shortly be joined by an international guest, Ms. Flavia Miklota, who has about 20 years of experience in sustainability and has led the practice at Deloitte and has supported capital market players as Director of Luxembourg Green Exchange. She's founding member of the UN Global Compact in Belgium. She has co-authored Making the Financial System Sustainable, a book which has been published last year in year 2020. The panel discussion today will be moderated by Mr. Shudipto Das. He is the former partner and India leader, climate change and sustainability for Ernst & Young, and he's presently the partner for Future Station Advisories. He has written several articles and he has published several interviews. He's a name which is known across all the professional forums, and he's a prolific speaker on topics around ESG, SDG, climate change, and credible reporting. We are looking forward to their thoughts, and without much further delay, may I request Mr. Karan Agarwal, Co-Chairman of National Council of SCZ ASSOCHAM, for his opening remark and to welcome Honorable Joint Secretary and eminent guest on behalf of Management Committee of ASSOCHAM. Over to you, Mr. Agarwal.
Thank you so much, Parminder ji. Honorable Joint Secretary, Mr. Sujit Kumar, Bajpayee, Government of India, distinguished guests, good day to all. I convey a warm welcome to today's webinar, Environment, Social and Governance Research, organized by ASSOCHAM. We look forward to this webinar for inspiring, informing, and encouraging organizations in the journey of ESG. In view of the current pandemic that the world is facing today, the importance of planning for future risks becomes very important. Possibly the only way to safeguard ourselves against future crises is to adopt socially responsible ethics and a robust ESG strategy. ESG or social responsibility is imperative for all organizations to incorporate at various levels. Simply put, ESG refers to the level of involvement of a company or countries towards sustainability. Environment and social governance refers to the fundamental factor that helps in evaluating the sustainability and ethical impact. It also helps in better determining the future financial performances. As the world is fighting this pandemic, people and businesses have shown resilience and have also started realizing that it is probably time to start thinking about climate change and other sustainable practices. From a commercial point of view, we are keen to know how sustainable practices will aid in attracting more customers, allow better access to resources, lower energy and water consumption, and also reduce operational costs. The webinar will be in a panel discussion format demonstrating market leadership and best practices. It will be followed by a Q&A session, which will give us an opportunity to share knowledge with our peers. During this conference, you will hear from global thought leaders and gain access to a forum discussing emerging governance issues. We have before us a wonderful lineup of speakers who are kind enough to join us today to share their insights and practice guidance for the business worldwide. Thank you so much, and I look forward to a wonderful webinar.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Agarwal. Thank you so much. I would now request our keynote speaker today, Mr. B.L. Chandak, Executive Director, RP Sanjeev Goenka Group, to share his thoughts. You are among one of those leaders who have led from the front and have taken several initiatives for the group. So over to you, Mr. Chandak.
Yeah, thank you, Parminder. I'm happy to share my thoughts. ESG strategies have become critical for our long-term business survival. Financials alone cannot tell the entire story unless we go into ESG front. To thrive in the new transformative world, we need to embrace ESG strategies as a tool for excellence. ESG is, to my mind, the new alpha mantra for corporates and societies. Now, in ESG, I would think that we cover environmental, social, and governance issues. In terms of environment, we cover carbon footprint, best practices for pollution and waste management, and embrace circular economy. In social side, we cover fair value proposition to society, health and safety of employees, gender equality, mainstreaming of disadvantaged communities. In governance, of course, corporate governance structure and some of the best practices to be followed by all of us in terms of growth and good survival. Now, a lot of different stakeholders are looking ESG as a tool to look at whether to invest in the companies or corporates or to lend money from banking side. So in terms of, say, investors, we now find that a lot of ESG funds are getting created. And even some of the Indian mutual fund industry people also are having separate ESG funds. And to my mind, a lot of trillions of dollars are likely to move to ESG funds in course of time. And we also find that some of the say Scandinavian countries and other people who are neat and clean and green, they are withdrawing from non-ESG compliant companies. Even banks are also looking at if you are ESG compliant and if your rating is good, then they give you lower rate of interest. Even employees are also looking ESG as a tool to understand whether to join or not. Just to share my experience, in RPSG, we had induction program 2 days back, and our chairman was asked by one of the millennial participants, what's our ESG rating? So it has gone to that extent. So all the stakeholders are looking at this as a tool to see. Regulators are driving, investors are demanding, customers are expecting, shareholders are relying, and employees are valuing. This is the scenario. And in terms of dynamics of ESG regulatory landscape in India, things started in 2012 when business responsibility report was initiated by government and SEBI and other regulators. And then initially it was optional, but later on it was made more or less compulsory. And in 2015, some more changes happened. 2017, more changes happened. 2019, more changes happened. And in 2020, business responsibility reporting was already there, but sustainability report also, they said that it would be good to have sustainability reports. And from next financial year, it's becoming compulsory for say first 1,000 companies in terms of market cap. So that is the kind of scenario we are facing. And companies with better ESG policies are definitely outperforming in terms of attracting good investments, good funds at cheaper rates, and companies which embrace ESG practices into their value chain system, they definitely command better valuation. So in conclusion, I would say that ESG has moved from margin to the center stage. And in fact, if we need to really see that we work better in this world, then we should look at triple bottom line approach, people, planet, and profits. And we don't have any option as a society but to embrace sustainable business models. And I would think ESG is prerequisite for every business to survive. Moreover, India has given commitments in Paris, and all of us need to work towards that to fulfill our country's commitment. I hope deliberations in your panel discussion will be of great help to all the participants, and I wish great success to this initiative of ASSOCHAM. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andak sir. I think you really put forward the point that, for getting the investments, ESG compliance is becoming necessary and it's becoming very important. And especially, the knowledge and sharing and employees coming forward and asking that what is our rating and where do we stand, that itself is a significant step forward. I would like to bring in now Mr. Narula here. He is an edupreneur who represents higher education segment, and he has also been very vocal of this, and he from his institution perspective has been promoting the learning and wanted the students to be aware of it, and from the higher education how this can be taken forward. I would like to have Mr. Narula's thought on this.
Thank you, Parminder. Thank you for your kind words. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to congratulate and thank ASSOCHAM for organizing this webinar and including the thought leaders within the space. So the term ESG is finally gaining momentum, not only in education, but also in the corporate world. ESG consciousness should be imbibed from a young age, and it should become an automatic influence in future pattern of the working life. Now, educational institutions are virtual training grounds for future global citizens. So it's thus imperative that ethical practices become the rule rather than the exception in our industry and other industries as well. The onus is on the leaders of higher education to educate and imbibe the values of ESG, not only to students, but vertically throughout our organizational ecosystem and even our supply chain for that matter. It's imperative that we understand that ESG principles don't work in a vacuum. Instead, it involves a large, complex network of different stakeholders. And I will elucidate this point by using our own extensive digitization program at GIS as an example. So given the shift towards digitization, almost all classes these days are being held online. The requirement for transparent accountability is the need of the hour. A notable advantage of digital teaching is its wide reach, ensuring both space and even time are no longer obstacles to education. Due to this evolution of teaching, we must ensure that there exists a responsible and ethical standard within this space. This digitization of GIS has enabled us to realize a lot of our many loftier goals for ESG, including going paperless by 2025 and ensuring greater sustainability for our organization as well, and decreasing our environmental impact. Now, going paperless alone helps reduce carbon dioxide emissions, we know that. And for instance, turning a single tree into 17 reams of paper results in 50 kilograms of CO2 being released into the atmosphere. Trees also act as carbon sinks, and every tree that is not cut down for paper usage is able to absorb those CO2 gases. Now, it's very easy for us to pat our backs for the digitization initiatives undertaken. There is a lot more to be done. We don't see digitization as a panacea for environmental impact, but it's a small step in the right direction. In fact, at JS, we understand that digitization actually increases pressure on, say, data centers. And these data centers are often, more often than not, they're powered by unclean energy. So coal or petroleum. This just what it does is it passes the ball on from our responsibility towards the environment to the next business in the chain. It is important for all businesses that are taking ESG decisions to look at the decisions regarding the environmental impact from a macro perspective. It is imperative for businesses to understand that it is not necessarily the big flashy machinery or the next $1 million crore rupee machinery that you buy that is more efficient, but your environmental impact comes down from the day-to-day decision and choices that your businesses make. So there's a famous saying that 80% of the effect comes from 20% of the effort. So if you apply ESG principles subconsciously to every small business decision, whether it be choosing recyclable paper or using sustainable containers for your product or installing low energy light bulbs in your offices, ESG principles as active choices in your business, you will be surprised how those small decisions will actually add up to reduce your company's environmental impact. So with this, I would actually like to hand it over to the eminent knowledgeable panel on their views on how we can actually scale up the good governance when it comes to ESG. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think both of you have really given food for thought for our panelists today to discuss and take forward the whole agenda of ESG. I would like to invite Honorable Joint Secretary Sir to share his thoughts from the government perspective, especially now that year 2021 is very significant. There's COP26 and there's a Glasgow conference and there's a lot that's happening. And we also talked about the Paris Convention, Mr. Chandak mentioned. So we would like to hear from Honorable Joint Secretary, sir, and thereafter we will hand over the command to the panelists for their deliberation. Sir, your thoughts, please.
Thank you very much, Parminder, and good afternoon, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I really congratulate ASSOCHAM for organizing this online event on such an important issue of ESG and this growing significance. And if I personally, if I talk about the concept of the whole ESG, you all will appreciate that this concept is not new. But it's just that, post-COVID scenario, now we have started to talk about more and more. And we started talking about this whole thing when we started talking about sustainable development long ago, and gradually evolving to this environment sustainability. And now It's ESG, this business sustainability in its full grown up avatar. I can say that. No, because when you talk about strategy, business strategy, when it becomes that word is coined, the business strategy, then that thing actually comes on the forefront of the all discussions, because then you start to see the profit and no return, long-term returns, long-term sustainability of the business. So I'm very happy that we have reached to that place where now we are talking sustainability as a strategy. So this transition, I would say, from sustainability to the ESG performance, in a way, it indicates that maturation of business practices to a more precise measurement of a portfolio's performance. So if I talk in terms of business sustainability, uh, as we all know, that this is basically a business approach, as everybody talked about, for creating long-term value by incorporating the elements of three elements of triple bottom line, the business objectives, and it creates profit for its shareholders while protecting the environment and improving the lives of those with whom it interacts. But there still exists a notion that spending on these things is like a philanthropic activity. I would not say that everyone has that notion, but yes, that notion is still prevalent. And there is also a notion that spending on these things makes the businesses unviable sometimes. But I can say with fair amount of confidence that it has remained one of the popular topics of discussions in five-star conferences. So, but now after this COVID, it has actually shown us the stark reality that this cannot go on forever. And each one of us needs to make it everyone's business if we have to sustain ourselves, and businesses need to play a major role in this. There are many examples worldwide that how corporates have adopted these principles of sustainability in their business strategies, and they have made a difference. To take an example of Nike, I'll say that they focused on reducing waste and minimizing the footprint. And then Adidas, you can see they created a greener supply chain targeting issues like dyeing and eliminating plastic bags. Then again, you take the example of famous Unilever, focused on organic palm oil, overall waste and resource footprint, and Nestle in areas where product life cycle, climate, water efficiency, and those kind of things. Yesterday only, I saw a statement from Mr. Mukesh Ambani, and that was music to my ears actually. That we have no option as a society, as a business, but to really adopt a sustainable business model. And he also said that I think that's it's a prerequisite for every business to survive as we go forward. And then somebody asked that this kind of thing will require dialing back on some of Reliance's businesses. So he gave very interesting answer that it means transforming our businesses and integrating that with future. So now here we are. I mean, it's such a lovely change. And when Mr. Chandok was actually giving example of the new appointee in his company asking that question, that was really interesting. I mean, we are on the right track. I mean, that means the educational institution which Mr. Narula was talking about, they have played a really good role in stimulating the young brains. So this is what they need of the hour today. But still a lot of work to be done because most companies fail to grasp the nuances of this ESG. And that is why they are not able to galvanize their employees to integrate sustainability into their everyday operations. There are many who still believe that sustainability is someone else's problem. And you can see then many companies, anything happens, they will point finger towards sustainability department guys to ask him. So this then we cannot achieve what we have actually desired to achieve. And of course now when we are talking about sustainability, as you said that 2021 is very important, and climate change is going to be a talk of the town or talk of the world everywhere. And it is a vital issue in ESG. And as we all know that billions and millions of people around the world, their lives and livelihoods are already facing adverse consequences of climate change. We know that it's not about just speed, but scale is needed, concrete action is needed. And India has been on the forefront of all the actions which is required. Although our contribution to the carbon footprint is very, very low, maybe I think 60% lower than the global average. We have shown our commitment by our raising the target of renewable energy to 450 gigawatts by 2030. In spite of all the developmental challenges, we have taken many, many bold steps on clean energy. This ethanol blending program is one such example, which Prime Minister inaugurated on the World Environment Day. Biodiversity, you see, land degradation neutrality. We have raised the target from 21 million hectares to 26 million hectares. So India is, you see, one of the very, very few countries which is 2 degree Celsius compliant. So that way, if you remember that Honorable PM speaking at Leaders Climate Summit, so he said that sustainable lifestyle. Actually, he pointed out that why, in spite of so many activities doing so much of population, why we have maintained such a low carbon footprint. He says because of our lifestyle is rooted in sustainable traditional practices. So therefore, he mentioned that sustainable lifestyles and a guiding philosophy of back to basics must be an important pillar of our economic strategy for the post-COVID era. So India's commitment towards Paris Agreement as well as lessons learned from COVID, it requires us to reduce our carbon footprints. In fact, this COVID has exposed the fault in our conventional way of business, state, and society governance. And now there is a growing need globally to build back better and ensure resilient and green recovery post COVID-19. And as a businesses, you can't afford to slip back to business as usual and need to learn from the mistakes. It is time for us to think business unusual. COVID-19 has forced us as individuals, as Mr. Chanduk also has said, that as individuals, institutions, and societies to rethink the way we have conducted ourselves and the basis of our decision making at home, at work, and in society at large. As my previous speaker said, that subconsciously when you start doing that, then that means you're going to achieve that. So consensus is now emerging globally about greater attention and investment towards preventing and mitigating those negative impact of businesses on workers, communities, and environment. And now businesses all over the world, they are scrambling to be better informed in future about risks and vulnerabilities in their value chains and investments globally. So in a nutshell, I'll say that only 3 things emerge. That first, we must care for our planet. Second, people are the biggest stakeholders. And third, profit is important because without it, business cannot survive. So any development without meeting those SDGs is incomplete. So while COVID presents enormous health and economic challenges, there are opportunities to jumpstart economies and rebuild societies through green recovery plans aligned with the 2030 agenda. And so basically 2030 agenda should be our roadmaps for building back better. In the end, I would conclude by saying that if this pandemic has taught us anything about how to overcome our socio-environmental challenges, it is that each one of us, as individuals, companies, or governments, need to take ownership of our future. Being a spectator is no longer an option. I'm sure this eminent list of panelists, the subsequent sessions, who are experts in the subject, will deliberate and present a way forward. And I look forward to your valuable inputs. And with this, I sincerely thank ASSOCHAM for having me here. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for your kind words. And as you rightly put in, that there is no shortcuts. We have to be responsible and take this this responsibility wholeheartedly and develop something which is critical for our future generations to come. So with this, I would like to thank all the key speakers who have shared their thoughts, and Honorable Joint Secretary, sir, for having given us the direction which will be used and taken forward by our eminent panelists here, who would share their thoughts. And since they are experts who have done a lot of work, we really look forward to suggestions from them. With this, I give the command to Mr. Sudipta Das, and it's over to you, Mr. Das, for leading the whole panel and taking forward this session. And we really look forward to some key outcomes out of this session. And I would invite our eminent listeners to post the questions in the chat box as the conversation is going forward. And Mr. Das will take those questions at the end of the panel discussion and respond to them appropriately. Over to you, Mr. Das. Thank you so much, everyone.
Parminder, just a second.
Yes,
Can
sir.
you I have some other meeting. I'll have to leave. I'm sorry.
Sure.
I wish that I would have continued, but maybe sometime next time. Okay?
Right.
So,
thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Mr.
Sir,
Das,
I am
it's
also
all
leaving.
yours.
I have got some other meeting.
Sure, I do understand.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chandok, it's okay. Mr. Das will take forward from here. Mr. Das, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Parminder. Thank you to
Mr. Das, I think you need to raise the volume or something, because the sound is very feeble. We are able to hear you, but not that well.
let me see. Better now?
No, sir, we still can't hear you, sir. It's the same problem on the testing day.
Okay now?
Testing times again.
Yeah.
Yes. What to do?
It's okay. I think we will try to listen to Mr. Das. We will raise volume speaker volumes from our side so that we can hear him.
Thank you, Parminder, and apologies, for this technical glitch. What's happening with my phone, but anyway, I think if you can listen, and we will try to manage. This is an excellent timing of this kind of meeting, a seminar. As you know, what we see last possibly year, 1 year, or maybe a year and a half, that this particular term, ESG, is possibly the most talked about buzzword in boardrooms. It's possibly the most talked about buzzword in the boardroom, and each and every boardroom is actually considering ESG as a very important aspect in the. I don't know how much connection this has with the pandemic that we are going last 1 year, but clearly one thing is very clear: has actually shown all of us that what a global disaster can be, what kind of challenges global disaster can create for all of us. I think people have realized, especially the corporate sector, the businesses, that this take care of our in terms of environmental and social and overall governance, and we prepare well for the possible next big disaster, and maybe bigger disaster, which is going to come our way, which is going to be climate change. It looks like we all our initiatives can actually maybe push back the climate change by possibly going to be some impact of climate change anyway. So I think there could be a reaction, some kind of correlation for that, and that the businesses considering for much more serious manner since the last 1 year. Really, we have seen that if you look at the global surveys, which has happened the last 2 or 3 years, incidentally, ESG has always remained as one of the top 3 risks for any business. So I think now that we see the importance and now we see the priority given in the boardrooms, it is very important for us to understand, learn, and importantly learn and try to pick up from the leaders in the ESG practice that we have in the country. We have got a very able panel. Each of them have been associated with ESG for many, many years. They have in their own way, their own functions in which they are performing ESG related activities actually. So for without spending much more, speaking much more on this, I think I would like to invite my suggestion. All the panelists will be the way we will run the session is to try to reach out to each panelist rounds. So each one will actually get a chance to speak twice, and time frame that I would really request each panelist to speak for about 5 minutes in per question per round. So overall, they get a chance to speak for about 10 minutes. Parminder mentioned, I would request all the questions from the audience, from delegates, chat box. At the end of the panel discussion, I will pick up, depending on the time available, I will try to pick up as much question as possible on the panelists. While asking questions, to have a specific panelist in mind, please his or her name so that the question goes to him or her. Not have any specific person question. I will put it open to the each panelist. Then whoever wants to pick it up can pick it up.
Mr. Sudipto, I think you'll probably have to speak a little louder. I think your voice is not very audible. I don't know if it's only me or everybody else as well.
Okay, good. Amit, we can hear him. So what he's saying is we will go around the table asking questions, so which is fine.
Sure, fine.
Okay, thanks so much. Thanks, Shankar, for supporting. I know there is some challenge in the microphone, but but bear with this for the time being. Okay, so my first panelist today is Alka Upadhyay from the Tata Group. Alka, I know her since last many years, maybe 10 years or more. I think my first association or first meeting with Alka happened when I was working for Ernst & Young. At that point of time, I was supporting the Tata Group for the low carbon transformation, I think about 10 years back or maybe 12 years back. Worked closely with Alka and her team. So Alka, my question, the first question, share with us, as we know, Tata is here in sustainability, not today. Last 1 year or whatever we are talking about here. Tata has been the leader since many years. Set example. So I would like you to ask you questions around how the Tata Group, and as a group, I know that you are a part of Tata Sons, so you are actually supporting all the group companies. So I would like to ask about what the group is doing around building up the resilience. Two things like your minimum agenda that you have. I know about your minimum agenda, which is very famous. Your actions around mitigation and or adaptation, your work around circular economy, of course, the work around governance.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Sudipta. Thanks a ton for your generous introduction to the Tata Group and me. Let me start with saying that, as Sudipta mentioned, that we are only 150 plus years young as a group, and we would like to be there for another 150 plus years minimum. And if we think from the longevity as a marker of a business success, you have no option but to look into environmental, social, governance issues. And that's precisely what has made us look into this subject much more closely. So as was pointed out, it is not philanthropy, it's for your own success till perpetuity that you are looking into this subject. Having said that, let me also talk about, just to refresh people and audience here, that we are a conglomerate which happens to be in 10 sectors. And these sectors are resource intensive sectors. We recognize that. Steel, power, chemicals, motors, name it, we are there. So these are the ESG headwinds. If we are not prepared, will hit us. If we are prepared, can lead to some level of opportunities. So we recognize that very well. And the work which Sudipta was alluding was actually around that way back in 2007. So Sudipta, it's nearly 13 or 14 years now when we started working on the low carbon strategy. But we also have companies and businesses in digital space, information and communication space. So we recognize that there is a tremendous business opportunity for us arising out of ESG conversation. I won't spend time on elements of that, but I'll spend some time how a giant conglomerate spread over 10 sectors with 100 plus operating companies, 800,000 employees pan world is doing this transformation journey. It's not, we are not there. We are doing, this is still the part of the journey. So don't please treat it as if everything is, I'm painting as a rosy picture, but let me tell you, there were 4 elements, or there are 4 elements which were crucial, which are crucial when we're talking about transformation as a part and not an incremental change. The first thing is start with the top. So we actually spend a lot of energy immersing our top management, including the board members, to understand sustainability and ESG. We tied up with the best in the world, Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, to have this immersion, and close to 200 CEOs, MDs, and board members have gone through that. So we want the board member to understand this subject better, so they ask the right and relevant question of the management. Then second was to make, as was pointed out, it's a cultural change. It's not to be, it's a subject which can't be done by a handful of sustainability professionals, but it has to be done across the business and across the organization. So tremendous amount of energy is spent. It's still continuing on the capacity building, not awareness, but capacity, the skill building on this subject. The third crucial, and in fact, I see some of my ex-colleague Tata Project here represented, and he will sort of remember what I'm hinting at. So we have close to 5,000 plus so-called champions of the subject within the Tata Group. But what we did with trained champions, we started looking into each business with the lens of long-term horizon strategizing, because sustainability topics, pick up any sustainability topics, climate change, biodiversity loss, inequality, talk of cybersecurity, talk of items like business and human rights can't happen in a day. So we are looking into, as a part of business sustainable strategy, on 3 horizon, 10 to 15 systemic view. And that is what I believe is the most crucial element once you have sufficient amount of capacity and capability. So horizon has to be longish, not 3 to 5 years, but as long as 10 to 15. And in subjects like climate change, even people are talking about 2050 as a one. But we realize also that we are not master on all the things. So a collaboration works, actually, I would say, equally important. So we have been collaborating into various spaces with the best in the field, the subject matter experts. So let me now deep dive on. So what Sudipta was saying, as a part of a conglomerate, you can't do everything. What we have started doing from the group center is driving what is called common minimum agenda. Treat us like a mini country, and which is federal in structure with 29 listed companies. So you can't have a diktat. What you can best do is take everyone along. And what we are driving from the group center is a 12 minimum common agenda across E, S, and G. I'll pick up only, for the paucity of time, the E component of climate change, because resilience is what we would like to sort of give an example around. So for us, it's a 13 years old story. We are very sure that while to take care of the transition to low carbon strategy, the risk needs to be taken care, and you need to create your low carbon strategy. But we also believe that is only one piece of the dealing with climate change. What needs to be done, especially for companies like us, which are in resource intensive, which are widespread, need to look into the climate induced fiscal risks. So I'm saying that while we work on the low carbon strategy, but Tata as a group is also looking into the fiscal risks wherever our assets exist, to the assets, to the supply chain, to the community. Tata's are, I believe, among the limited few corporates who's looking into disaster response in a very, very structured manner. So we are actually looking into community resilience as well. So it's supply chain, assets, markets, and the community. And this is the two-pronged approach we believe will be required by everyone, whether you are an emitter or not, but being in the tropical region, being in the region which has got such a longish coastline, you will be vulnerable. So we recognize that. We have started recognizing the vulnerabilities with the intent of coming up with adaptation levers. And this piece together is our two-pronged approach of combating climate change. So I will take a pause over here because I would like to listen to my other colleagues and panelists here as well. Thank you, Sudipta.
Thanks, Alka. Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible now. Better not, Alka?
Sounds good.
We can hear you, Sudipta. Please.
I think the headphone is not working. Anyway, so I will try without the headphone. So thanks, Alka. And it was great to learn about the initiatives that as a group the Tatas have taken, and I'm sure everyone else can actually learn from those examples and build up our own resilience around environmental, social, and governance aspects in our own way. My next panelist is Surajit Bose. Surajit is one of the possibly great professionals that we have in the country. My former colleague, last how many? Worked together in several for many years. So Surajit today is a very large global company, which is not only it is dealing in a very delicate but it's a product which is actually most known kind of product and how my question to Surajit will be, if you can please share with us things about how Coca-Cola is building the climate resilience, using very important tool, climate resilience around gas, rather carbon, climate resilience around water, how there is a convergence across the value chain, across the supply chain around circular economy, what all Coca-Cola is doing in India and also globally. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you so much for your kind words. Distinguished guests, panelists, ASSOCHAM office bearers, and the respected moderator, Mr. Das. And I thank ASSOCHAM for this opportunity, wonderful opportunity. To begin with, this topic ESG resilience, when I looked at it and the question that has been asked to me, what is the business case for corporates to act on ESG and climate impacts and build resilience? I just wanted to quickly visit that before I got into my main comments. And what I can reflect upon is, understanding the vulnerabilities in assets, operations, services, sometimes, things that can lead to downtime, loss of production, jobs, and address components that sit outside the control of the business. Maybe, absolutely in the space of raw material sourcing and things like that, and that can be impacted by climate change. So this is the compelling reason why there is a solid business case today to understand the ESG and climate change impacts. And lastly,
obviously you have to address all of these potential failures, if we want to call them, through controls, procedures, policy, advocacy, and procurement practices. So in a nutshell, resilience sits absolutely today at the core of the business. Now, I would like to answer the question, in two parts. One will be to explore the key learnings and synergies between ESG and our fight against the pandemic. What has the pandemic really taught us, and where does it connect with the ESG resilience? And in the next part of it, if you bear with me, I will discuss how corporates like ourselves, a 139-year-old company, address resilience as an integral part of environmental and social governance. So our fight for the pandemic and climate change, ESG action, in my view, has taught us three very important things. One is resilience, the other is convergence, and the third is global action. If you note, all three of these have somehow got a connotation with the way the world is today grappling with this challenge of COVID, and they're coming together to provide solutions and answers. So resilience is about a system rebound after a shock, coping and understanding vulnerabilities across supply chains. And companies like ours have benefited from frameworks like the Task Force for Climate-Related Disclosures, TCFD. Recently, the G7 has backed making climate risk disclosure mandatory, as you all know, to safeguard the financial system from climate-related shocks. The next is convergence, and we see tremendous amount of convergence happening in the space of ESG today in fighting COVID as well as climate change across the globe. And we see a range of convergences and different facets of ESG and climate change space as well. For example, value chain convergence. If you look at that, today our impacts are no longer confined within the manufacturing space. My previous speaker also mentioned, how their organization deals with this extended, organization today, the entire value chain, which starts from, even for an FMCG like ours, the ingredients, the distribution, the packaging, the manufacturing, and our emissions, our water, our materials, the circularity, all are within this. So the convergence in value chain is the first one. Next is the convergence around circularity. We are seeing the circular economy, which is evolving, which requires us to take a very different look at the materials that we use, the water that we use, the Scope 3 carbon footprint emissions. And the best part is all these are interrelated completely. Materials, water, and carbon emissions. So we are looking at the circular economy of materials as well as the regenerative use and replenishment of water. For example, the European Union, if you see, is looking at creating jobs as they become more climate resilient. The new European Green Deal is actually trying to create jobs while mitigating and making more climate resilience possible. The second one on convergence is on ambitions. And this is very interesting as well. You have science-based targets, which our companies like ours have signed up to for a 1.5 degree centigrade or a 2 degree centigrade world. We also see in parallel nationally determined contributions, or the indices, under the Paris Agreement. Similarly, we find both large companies as well as countries are transcending towards a net zero world. ESG finance is emerging rapidly, and there seems to be a resurgence of the carbon markets after the Conference of Parties 26, which looks imminent. So if we looked at the regulatory push which we have, for example, in almost all countries, in the US in 2021, the US announced that they would cut emissions by over 50% by 2030. Japan has almost doubled its to 2030 targets. So we see that there is huge convergence also on the regulatory side. Reporting framework convergence is the other one, where we are seeing that the International Integrated Accounting Board, IIRC, of the UK, as well as the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, SASB, of the US, they are merging under the IFRS umbrella, which is a significant change to all companies, including global companies like us, in how ESG will be driven in the future. The 10K SEC filings, in the US Stock Exchange, Securities and Exchanges Commission, is requiring ESG and climate change risk detailing and transparency to a very great extent. You are all aware of the business responsibility and sustainability reporting becoming much more detailed, quantitative, as well as comparable, and becoming compulsory for the top 1,000 companies in India itself. So this was about convergence. Now, after resilience and convergence, if I would like to talk about the third one, which is the global action. Just like we have global action today on COVID, we are seeing global action on peaking of emissions around 2030. The choice of fuels, for example, gas, hydrogen, renewables, offshore wind. Talking of hydrogen, just now, we have a news that there would be a hydrogen purchase obligation, just like the RPO in India. And certain companies would have it compulsorily a requirement to buy green hydrogen, which is a fantastic kind of a legislation which is on the anvil, and on the modes of transportations like electric vehicles. So for a long-term energy security, hydrogen with natural gas would be an important stepping stone. We see huge investments happening in carbon capture and storage. ESG sentiment scores are being brought out by the financial institutions. So if we look at mobilizing finance, which is going to be a very critical step, in the world that we are going to face, we see that ESG and technology is happening at an unprecedented scale. And if you read the recent Economist article, they actually say that the proof that, hectic activity on zero has started is that there are bottlenecks which are appearing and these are being unappreciated right now, in the sense that, for example, for electric cars, the 5 top minerals, their prices have soared by 139%. There's a huge clamoring for balsa wood for wind turbines. Auctioning of the seabed is going on for offshore wind. The article recognizes the introduction of carbon prices because this could provide market signals to the commercial decision making for a long-term perspective. We should remember that only 22% of the world greenhouse gases as of now are covered by a carbon price. So in a nutshell, we are seeing green bottlenecks, and this is a very clear sign that theory is moving to reality finally in the space of ESG, finance, and to bring about resilience. Now I come to the next part of what Mr. Sujit Das asked, in terms of what companies like us actually have been thinking and doing about climate resilience. Firstly, very interestingly, our last year's, that is 2020's, the Coca-Cola Company's sustainability report was actually called the Business and Environmental and Social Governance Report. Second, it was enshrined with commitments that despite the pandemic, ESG goals would remain unchanged. Thirdly, ESG report of the company mentioned the word resilience 21 times, which is really remarkable. First was the resilience in materiality. It talked about the ESG issue becoming now a much more complex issue. It's no longer climate change risk. It is climate change risk and resilience. It appreciates the need for enhanced. Yes, we're running out of time. Sure. Appreciates the need for enhanced community water resilience, access to water and sanitation, and as signatories to the CEO water mandate, it talks about resilience in coalition on the space of water and strategy. So on supply chain, driving improvements across raw material and agricultural value chains, farms resilience, reducing environmental impacts. So in summary, ESG resilience, convergence, and collaborative global action will be the hallmark for the new decade. That's very clear. And ESG globalization and race to net zero finally actually looks like it is from theory to reality. Thank you so much. Over to you, Sudipta.
Thank you. Thank you, Surojit. Thanks so much. Thanks for sharing, the concerns and the actions which the global companies, Coca-Cola, taking. At the same time, thanks for sharing what all is happening worldwide, across the various continents, and, this is really a right time. This is really a very happy time for, people working in the field of ESG, because we see a lot of activity, a lot of action happening all over the world, whether it's from the regulators or from the businesses. I will really request every panelist to be a bit mindful about the time, because we are already running a bit late. So our next panelist today is Mitesh Pandya from Vedanta. Mitesh, as you know, he heads the he's the Chief Sustainability Officer of Vedanta, the aluminum business of Vedanta. So, and Vedanta also is a global company. So, my question to Mitesh would be, if you kindly share with us about the ESG and the resilience which, Vedanta, the aluminum business of Vedanta, or Vedanta as a whole, is trying to build, using ESG as a tool. So this is my first question, and I have one more question for you, which possibly I will ask in the next round. Thanks, Mitesh. Carry on, please. Mitesh, could you hear me?
Mitesh, you're on mute, I guess.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah.
Yes,
so
sir.
thanks, Sujit, for this kind introduction. And again, good afternoon to all my co-panelists. So it's my pleasure to be a part of this distinguished panel and then share our experience. At the same time, the objective is also learn from the others' experience. Now, as Sujit rightly said, that we are a global company, and when you are a global company, your stakeholders are not only local but also global. So you don't have an expectation to meet with your local stakeholders, but also with the global stakeholders. Having said that, we are mindful that we need to deliver a social performance in the sense that we should be acceptable to all our stakeholders, and that should not meet our or deliver our expectation not at the local level but also at the global level. So what we are doing as a Vedanta to manage the resilience, I think I will come back. First of all, we need to exist cordially with our stakeholders. So we don't only look at the resilience from our point of view, but also the society where we live in. So our job is basically, while we look at the design point of view, that how we should make our structure resilient. We are also working with the community that their livelihood because of the climate change or their infrastructure because of the climate change doesn't get jeopardized, and they also manage their life more sustainably, like what we plan to do it. Now, we are the one company that actually, in 2012 come out with our target because we fall into one of those hard to orbit, climate sectors. Very frankly, because we are in India and most of our power comes from the coal-based power operations. We don't have an option because the fact of the matter is that we want consistent, stable quality power. So even if I wish to go to the grid and try to get the power which is renewable or coming from the renewable sources, the consistency of the power and the constant availability power is a big challenge for us. So we're just looking for various options how we will go about it. Having said that, we have decided that the energy efficiency is the one key area which we'll focus upon to mitigate our emissions, and definitely once we try to manage and mitigate this also happens to make the world more resilient, because we expect that as the mitigation takes place, the impact of climate change should come down. Of course, it's not going to happen before 2050 because all the major leading economies in the world, including US and China, are talking about bringing down their carbon neutrality not before 2050, 2060 kind of thing. We realize that if we have to do this, then we need to look at that our infrastructure, and we are actually, where our operations are. We are in the eastern part of the country, and we have seen that the intensity of the heavy rainfall in a very short span has actually increased over the last few years. Even if you look at the recent, what you call the cyclone which came to Odisha, and our operations actually fall into Chhattisgarh, Odisha, and near to that area. So that gets impacted because of that. And during one of those, this thing, we realized that we have more than 150 mm of rainfall in just 3 to 4 hours. And we realized that if we not do anything and relook at the design from the climate perspective, probably the future things would be very, very challenging. And you know that our operations are not easy to shut down. and to restart again. Also, it takes about almost 5 to 6 months to actually complete get back into the gear. So now what we are doing is actually reevaluating complete design from the perspective of drainage and infrastructure, and ensuring that we design our plant at least to manage that once in 100 rainfall or 100-year rainfall kind of thing, so that we don't really get into those kind of issues. We actually saw it about 2 years back. Second, what we are also doing, that when Salka said that, we are also looking at disaster management plan very, very seriously. So one is developing infrastructure, but also putting that immediate mitigation plan in terms of disaster management. So the top activity with respect to disaster, if it comes into place, we don't put that lot of money into the developing a very high level of resilience, but also trying to top it up with the emergency response plan, which we need to do. Our efforts to manage our ash dikes and operation has also significantly increased, considering that good design practice is why to do that, because you know that if those ash dikes, which has got billions of tons of ash, which is lying over there, gets liquidated, then it will be a big disaster. I'm sure some of you know about what they can have. Vale, which had an incident in Brazil in 2015 and 2019. I think more than 2,000, I think 350 people officially died, but unofficially, I think more than 2,000, 3,000 people actually died. So these are about some of our area to ensure the climate-related risk because of our infrastructure, make them more resilient, work with the community, because community need to make sure that they doesn't get jeopardized because of this. And we expect that the soil quality to go down. We expect that the rainfall rate and frequent floods are going to create a lot of variability in the their income of farmer community. They may not have the water coming in, so we are also looking at our water infrastructure being more robust. While we have done a lot of those water survey, as of late of now, people are talking about including the climate resilience also is a part of that. So those are also part of our what do you call that risk mitigation or risk planning. And while we do that, we also ensure that community part of the risk is also involved in that, immediate community part of it. So that because finally what happens that if the community doesn't have resources, they will not be happy. And one or another, they will feel that there is an inequality in the society, and that is going to come and hit us back. So we wanted to see that because of our effort, whatever we call it, the resilience or mitigation, we want to make sure that whatever the equality we can try to bring in the society, we would like to do that. So that is the one area we are working upon. So whatever may be our effort, whether in terms of improving the design, improving our operational efficiencies, improving our mitigation plan, working with the communities, one or another, we are trying to work with the community and ensuring that we have a sustainable operation and resilient operation for the future. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Thanks, Mitesh. And we see how concerned Vedanta is, and how proactive Vedanta is in mitigating the risks and challenges, especially around climate, and how you're building up the ESG, within the organization. I think we have now discussed, we have heard.
Just to add one thing, see, we don't have an option, very frankly, because our entire, what we call the assets, say whether mining assets or smelter assets, they are prone to this climate vagaries. If that happens, our operation will be completely stopped. So we need to start looking from the design point of view and ensure that we have a resilient design so that operation doesn't get impacted. And while we do that, we also make sure that communities also basically gets benefit out of it. That's it. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sure. So, we have heard about, three leading businesses, Coca-Cola, Tata, and Vedanta, about, how they look at ESG and what sort of action they're taking. Let me now, move on to the consultants, the consultants, especially the ESG consultants, they are working back with, many industries, large as well as not so large. So, they have possibly a much wider perspective about what's happening, in the country and maybe beyond. So my next panelist is, Shailesh Tyagi. Shailesh is a partner of climate change and sustainability, working with Ernst & Young. And my question to you, Shailesh, would be, we talk about ESG maturity. We talk about various companies, in their scale of maturity, how with their position, at a various levels of maturity in ESG. So my question would be, Shailesh, how do you define ESG maturity, first of all? And what do you see is the kind of ESG maturity which, is there among, most of your clients that you find in India? And what are the things that, the companies should do to improve on their ESG maturity?
Thanks, Sudipta. Thanks, Sudipta. Good day, everyone. Hope you can hear me all right. The great question, Sudipta, because look, if we look at the entire ESG journey over the past 5 years, or we look at across geographies, we clearly see a trait that either companies are responsive, essentially compliance driven, where they are responding to, say, ESG requirements on an ad hoc basis, right? The changing expectation, yes, they are being met, but some of the traits we start looking at those companies may revolve around, say, limited board oversight. Yeah, I'm not saying there is none, but limited. It's all around license to operate. It's around how ESG responsibility will reside outside of established management systems and controls. You could clearly see that it's there. One or few departments are basically delivering on promises, right? Whether compliance or marketing, as an example. The other trait we can see would be around how ESG considerations are not integrated into the business or, say, the regulatory or compliance regimes of the companies. There's not a lot of coverage around principles. Some of the principles we have, like Alka covered it, and other panelists covered. It's around how it's driven through certain standards, guidelines. So those are responsive. But look, to answer your question, in India, I can clearly see companies are now more performance driven. They are more around their systems, internal controls are enhanced. Their data collection processes are pretty mature. The performance management system is there. Now, say some of the things we have seen would be around how board and execs, they receive regular updates. There's a cross-functional ESG committee overseeing ESG priorities and performance. We can clearly see that there's a standalone sustainability strategy. May not be that well integrated always into the business strategy, but it's there. And then we can clearly see that the materiality assessment process is pretty mature. Something which we are seeing here in India, and I think it's taken from the West, is that ESG is looked at what are my material, environmental, and social aspects? What are my underpinning governance levers, right? Once I have a solid understanding of that from the lens of impact, not only from the lens of what's material to the company or value chain stakeholders, then the next is around looking at a very effective narrative and disclosure, right? It's not a data dump. It's looking at the narratives, KPIs, and link to the value creation. So that's something we are saying. And finally, companies really want to improve. I mean, the companies and the people on this panel, I mean, they are already there in terms of value enhancing, right? The examples we have seen is the theme coming up is integrated. We can clearly see there's established governance, there's established risk management process, pretty mature strategic allocation of resources. Companies are even looking at integrated profit and loss now, right? They are looking at ESG monetary valuation in terms of impacts. And look, these companies, I mean, this is something which we have seen. Most of my experience, as you know, was in Australia and New Zealand, and I could see that companies there had established board oversight. The committee charters were very well defined. The training and updates were defined regular. ESG was well integrated into ERM, some of it into executive compensation, also into staff, limited weightage, but staff, you can say KPIs as well. The ERM was pretty mature, very well. ESG, you could see there was an ESG committee. You would see ESG integrated into internal audit plan. Standards, they won't just go for, let's start with GRI, and then as and when we are getting more and more standards coming, SASB, or IRC, I'm going to just comply. No, they well thought out process looking at an effective report, right? Crisp, integrated, and effective report. So looking at standards from that thing. And of course, moving towards reasonable assurance as well. So over to you, Sudipta. Thank you.
Thanks, Shailesh. That's really, you gave us a insight about what you see in various companies in India, as well as, maybe certain things that you've experienced in Australia and New Zealand, which possibly, we also have certain Indian companies. I would think quite a few Indian companies are doing it, but yeah, we will expect more and more companies to do it. Great. My next panelist, okay, my next panelist is Shankar R. Shankar is an executive director. He's a consultant with ED with Future Station. And Shankar is also doing consulting on ESG, but in a bit different manner as compared to what Shailesh is doing, possibly. Shankar essentially is working with family-owned businesses in India and hand-holding them across the ESG maturity curve. So, he is sort of working as a part of the company's team, internal team, and trying to bring up the company in the ESG maturity ladder. So, we would like to hear from Shankar about his experience, and specifically what I would like to ask is what are the drivers for these family-owned businesses. I mean, till 5 years back, we hardly had any family-owned business, talking about ESG. It was all the large companies and multinationals talking about ESG. ESG was more of a fashion, some time back. But today we find, even not so big, may not be, companies, family-owned businesses are working in it. So what are the drivers? Why are they spending time, resource, and money in developing ESG maturity? And what resilience they seek to build in their businesses? Shankar, over to you.
Thanks, Aditya. In the context of what Shailesh just spoke about the maturity of companies, he spoke of Australia, New Zealand, and the developing countries, and he spoke about the family-owned businesses and maybe the mid-cap kind of companies. You'd look at these from a different perspective. They are the companies who, the family-owned businesses, the one whose value can be significantly increased with further attention to ESG factors. They offer a wealth of opportunity, and I guess investors are likely to be interested in the social factors, including how people have managed the pandemic. That's another big talking point. And I guess these companies have more growth potential and tend to outperform the stronger economy. Some of the MNCs who are, I guess, well on the path of industry leadership. So the question you asked me, and I guess ESG is blind, like a blind set of people feel an elephant is, but like good old Lord Ganesha, not all of them are wrong. So from the perspective of the triple bottom line, if you look at ESG from the financial, from revenue growth, productivity, the profit margin, ROI, capital cost, risk management, and perhaps the valuation of the enterprise, to the social dimension and the environmental, because not just the environmental stewardship, but also the energy, water, material, emissions and waste. I guess the kind of businesses you speak about would be more driven by customers, by clients in both the segments you spoke about, be it a construction, an EPC, or a manufacturing. A client and customers would define the agenda, including setting them off on an ESG journey, and possibly more impacted by material issues, more pertinent to business. So the global mega forces of climate change, water, urbanization, material availability, etc., they apply to all. And perhaps some of the businesses might have challenges in mapping SDGs to begin with. Having said that, the spread across these businesses versus the bigger ones would be similar to the Fortune 500 split of companies who've taken climate targets. Typically, you'll have most of them in the developed countries, in the US, in Europe, and perhaps Japan. And I guess Sujit spoke about the laws that the SEC across the US has been mandating ESG disclosures for public companies. Likewise, as you mentioned, the Securities and Exchange Board of India has also required the BRSR be mandatory for the top 1,000 listed entities, and all of them come back and think, are we on the top 1,000? And that's where it starts. So I guess the focus has been on transparency and to identify and assess sustainability related risks and opportunities. And with investors requiring increased accountability for companies, the trend has kind of been going. Globally also, I think even in the oil majors, be Total or Shell, they've been asked to set emissions global targets. And I guess it's a challenge that all industries face. But I guess for the family-owned businesses, it's more about the internal stakeholders, the employees that need a vehicle to drive on in a kind of resilience post the pandemic. The pandemic has been a black swan event, and talking of the swan, it's a deepening distress around the Stranded Workers Action Network that talks of the unemployment. 92% of the workers didn't receive any money at all across the last, even including wave 2. So I guess, like I said, even for smaller companies, family-owned companies, the 3 Ps from the profits, the people, and the planet, I guess it's more about the purpose that is the the fulcrum of all that happens. A cause with an inspiring purpose, as they say. It's also about preservation, business as usual or as unusual as our keynote speaker, Dr. Sujit said. It's also about career and life as usual. So I guess it does require corporates now, including these mid caps and the family-owned businesses, to engage more with the people than they did before. The advantage is there's lesser layers, they are more agile, they can make quicker decisions. You can drive quicker wins, and I speak of it from both a practitioner and a consulting perspective, as Unification has engaged both ends. The low-hanging fruits can be done better. They're less focused than the bigger ones on greenwashing. So I guess that I think is my context to what works differently in ESG in the kind of industries you spoke about.
Thanks, Shankar. And I think, personally, I feel this is a great sector in which you're working. If I say by sector, I mean, may not be the large company. We've been talking about the large companies. We know what they're doing. They're all covered by regulations on SEBI regulations about being the first top 1,000 companies and several other regulations depending on whichever continent they're working in. But at the same time, I think it is very, very important for us to understand what the largest number of companies in India, which happen to be in the medium and smaller segment, what they are doing. Because unless they take care of ESG, all the good work done by the large companies will not ultimately result nationally as a country. So I think I really appreciate the kind of work you're doing and the kind of specialized sector that you've chosen, the not so big companies, and because they need the support, honestly. So we have heard about the large companies, the businesses. We've heard about the consultants. We've heard from the consultants. Rather, we have heard from the industry, from the consultants. Now we will hear from possibly the most important player in the value chain. People who are funding businesses, people who are actually managing the most important resource, possibly money. And the next speaker is Amit Talgeri. Amit is the Chief Risk Officer of Axis Bank, one of the largest banks in the private sector in India. And my question to Amit would be, so I've got 2 questions in this particular round. One is, in the banking sector, and especially for your bank, Axis Bank, how has ESG managed? How is it managed? And the steps taken towards building sustainability and resilience. Is ESG risk a major risk in the risk universe of the bank? Because you are the Chief Risk Officer. So, my question was, how important is the ESG risk in your entire risk universe that you are regularly dealing with? And my second question to you in this round would be, what are the challenges faced in cascading ESG framework and sustainability initiative in the organization? So Amit, over to you.
Thanks, Sudipta. First of all, thanks for inviting me to this event and to be on this esteemed panel. Normally, if you go back to 2008 and 9, bankers are not associated with responsible lending. So it's a welcome change, to kind of see the kind of importance that the bankers have started giving to the larger responsible lending and the ESG specifically. So let me start by giving you a perspective of the kind of importance that this has to the sector. I think some of the speakers have already talked about the importance of accountability, responsibility at all levels to address this issue. I think it's happening in the banking industry as well. The regulator, to start with, is overemphasizing what we need to kind of start looking at. While there are no prescribed guidelines at this point of time, if you remember, for the first time, in the RBI monetary policy report, there have been mentions about ESG, there's mention about sustainability, there is mention about climate risk, which was not happening, let's say, about a year or 2 years or 3 years ago. So that's something that starts at the very top there. The second, I think, if I recollect, Mr. Chandak talked about it, increasingly stakeholders and investors are looking at this from an investment point of view. There are difficult questions around what kind of disclosures we are giving as bankers, what kind of portfolios we hold in our books. Are we, let's say, ensuring responsible lending? So let me take that in two parts. One is the governance part of it, and the other is the lending practices itself. How do we as bankers, and specifically Axis Bank, how are we kind of addressing this issue? So first is clearly at the board and the governance levels. Today, there are increasing conversations happening at the board level. I think Alka mentioned this. Whether it is, let's say, in the banking environment, the risk management committee, for example, is responsible for ESG risk, very clearly documented. The whole premise about banking being capital intensive from a capital adequacy point of view, the whole capital assessment exercise which the regulator prescribes for all banks contains paragraphs around climate risk, contains paragraphs around ESG risk. So that's just giving you the fact that the tone from the top is very, very high in terms of the messaging that you're giving down the line. The second is, of course, at a bank-wide level. I mean, if I were to kind of look at that, at Axis Bank, we have a steering committee which is headed by the executive director, which I'm a part of, which looks at primarily anything to do with ESG across the bank and across the group. So we've looked at ESG being woven, within the balanced scorecards, objectives, goals of even the business leaders. So when we talk about, let's say, the home loan portfolio, we talk about green housing. When we talk about the corporate portfolio, we talk about green portfolio. So some of this is actually embedded in terms of the governance. Now, if I come back to the second part, which is the lending practices, I think the key to the question is that how are we driving this within the lending practice? It's nice to say it's on paper, but how do you kind of operationalize it? So the way we have done that is at the bank-wide level, we have what is called as a sustainable lending policy and procedures, which basically documents go, no go, what we will do, what we will not do. And it's quite possible that we have large portfolios where over a period of time we would have built them. But there is a conscious effort to say that, okay, what we call the dirty portfolio, we want to bring down, the green portfolio that we want to kind of take it up. So this is part of what we call the sustainable lending policy and procedures, which is a very integral part of the credit lending decision. The second thing is, of course, like I mentioned very clearly, the lending to the green sectors itself. Maybe it's mass mobility, for example, renewable, solar. You talk about electric vehicles. So there's a conscious effort to kind of up the ante in terms of how much is my portfolio green, is something that we are really looking at. The other is, of course, at the end of all of this, I think, if I recollect, Mr. Bajpayee mentioned, we still need to make profit. So it needs to get embedded into the fact that I don't want to lend just because it is green. I want to ensure it is priced for risk. So there are risk appetite frameworks, which are again, driven by the board in terms of what we can and what we what we can't do. That's part of the embedding of the whole green framework that we have pulled together around modeling around responsible lending. So there is also the increasing, I think I mentioned this about regulatory push. So one is at the macro level, the other is of course the micro level, whether you look at priority sector lending targets, economically weaker section, sustainability, all of that somewhere is getting embedded into the whole ecosystem. We do keep looking at external validations. We've been one of the banks which have been a constitute of the FTSE Good Index for a long period of time now. This is basically a London Stock Exchange initiative around measuring performance of companies globally, which demonstrates strong ESG practices. But I would probably say these are baby steps that we've taken as a bank, in the long journey. The second part of your question in terms of what challenges we see, as lenders, it's easy for us to say that let's look at the traditional financial analysis, the bank statements and the performance and the business model, etc. But we have to keep in mind for ESG risk assessment, there is very limited data available in the public domain. So it's very important for us to ensure that there is consistent information availability. The second is the whole taxonomy around it. I mean, what constitutes green is not something which is really documented at this point of time at least in the banking industry. So standard definitions, implementation of those consistent standards are clear challenges that we see. The other is, of course, this whole thing around methodological challenges. What do I mean by that? What exactly is ESG assessment? What exactly is ESG risk assessment? And if I were to kind of take an example, the reliance of, for bankers is more on environmental certification more than really looking at the potential adverse impact. I think that paradigm shift has still not happened. It's probably still work in progress, as I would probably put it. The third level there is also the fact that are these tools embedded in the rating cycle, in the whole credit cycle of what we call in banking terminology in the credit life cycle? Is this embedded, or is this just one more tick in the box, as we say? The third big challenge, that we see is the whole skill set and capacity building. I think somebody talked about it. In the banking industry itself, we have very limited resources who can really, what we call experts, to even do this ESG risk assessment, and that's a big challenge. And the last part of, what's a big challenge is this whole impact quantification. I think the previous speaker talked about floods and, the climate risk that we see. There is no way we can kind of put a impact quantification around it. I mean, yes, you can to some extent, but on a sustainable basis, if we were to look at what is this risk measurable, government action, policy action, you look at strikes, for example, in some of these places. So these are the last part in terms of what we see as challenges. The way I see it is there's a lot of progress that's happened in terms of overcoming this, but clearly a long way to go as I see it. Back to you, Sudipta.
Thanks, Amit. It's very reassuring actually for all of us to understand, how the banks are looking at ESG, and it is really, I think, hearing from you, listening from you about, what Axis Bank is doing. I think this is really very encouraging. My next speaker, or the next panelist today, is playing an equally important role, as the banks are playing. And he is Rajiv Kumar. Rajiv is the Chief Risk Officer of Bajaj Allianz Insurance Company. And as you know, the insurers play extremely important role today in terms of supporting or managing risk of business, especially connected to ESG. So my question to Rajiv would be about how there are two things, basically. First of all is how Bajaj Allianz is integrating ESG risk or managing the ESG risk in your portfolio, the portfolio of the companies that you are insuring. And my second question would be aligned to how, as a large insurance company, what all you're doing internally to building ESG within the organization. Rajiv.
Yeah. Thank you, Sujit, and for inviting. And once again, a very good afternoon to all the panelists. Now, as you know, when it comes to insurance, particularly, we are part of the non-life insurance company. Now, we are at the receiving end of all the climate change that is happening all around. Now, why I say so is that in India, if you see, The West Coast used to be something where the cyclones used to hit once in 4 years. But of the last, I think 4 or 5 years, we are seeing practically every year the events happening. Now, while I say that, I should also say that unfortunately, India has not contributed to the climate change, but perhaps is at the receiving end because of deeds of other countries. Having said that, as an insurer, our main goal is to see that the type of risk that we insure, which is basically different types of industries. I mean, if I take the property and other insurances, liabilities and all. Now, whether these insureds are actually taking care of their risk. Now, losses can happen in the best of the risk. For that only the insurance is there. But if the insured themselves don't undertake measures to mitigate something which is obvious, in that case, that will be categorized as a bad risk. Now, therefore, our entire underwriting process involves, particularly when it comes to the hazardous industries, that we do a risk inspection where we go into basic process hazards, the housekeeping, and very important, the management attitude towards the risk. And then try to figure out a risk rating as to what is the appropriate. Now, if we feel that there are areas which needs a proper mitigation to be in place, which is not there, there is a discussion with the customer to make him aware that these are the areas why and how it should be taken care of. Now, we have both the types of customers. One who will be very receptive to such suggestions and will ensure that over the period of time, those mitigations do get implemented. But then we also have, unfortunately, a customer base where they'll be too driven by the profitability or the revenues, and will see this as a cost. And hence, we don't have a choice if we want to make our portfolio sound to see that we pick up industries or insured who are receptive and who are ready to implement those changes. Of course, it has to be economically viable. Now, as we see, particularly during my almost 4 years of experience that I had in this industry, what I've seen is that the industry, as was rightly pointed out by you, the MSME particularly. Now, while they are in the growing phase, there is very little importance given to such areas. But as they grow, gradually they become more conscious about the brand and the value of these things. And then they are receptive to those things which are being said by our risk engineers. However, being an operator in India, we cannot totally avoid industries who are not ready to change. But then we can certainly have a threshold. Up to that only we will take those as known as declined risk. Otherwise, our portfolio will become very, very lopsided towards adverse risk, and that will impact the profitability greatly. I can only say that this practice of underwriting over the period of time has helped us not only have customers right from the very beginning who has continued with us because they see the value add is making sense, but also has positively impacted on the profitability. And I can say that we are perhaps one of the few insurers who will be consistently making underwriting profit over the years. Now, there could be areas which particularly don't directly relate to environment when it comes to risk. But I can only emphasize that something which is poorly managed risk is also an environmental hazard. Now, the examples are many. I mean, if you go to a chemical unit, if you go to a petrochemical unit, you will find there are different types of industry who give different importance to the safety features. Now, this impacts not just the assets that are there, the environment which they are working in, but also the people who are working there. And therefore, if I remember, the Indian liability underwent a change after Union Carbide incident, where a large number of people got affected because something was not properly managed while it was not working. But that doesn't mean that if the company is not functioning, the hazardous materials are not properly taken care of. So that was also a responsibility of the company which was owning. Now, having said that, I can say that we do have a role to play, but there is a limit to which we can influence the customers to change. But we try our bit, and if they don't change at all, we don't have any other choice but to say that thank you, we cannot ensure because it will be beyond our appetite. So that is what they. And in simple way, if I say, even as a risk management, the severity and the frequency are very, very critical components. Now, all these industries over the period of time that we have seen have higher frequency of losses, just because they are not putting in place the mitigation measures that is required for that type of an industry, or maybe the location where they are. So this is so far as what and how we are trying to do when it comes to improving the environmental aspect of our customer base that is also impacting us as well as the environment. Now, when it comes to the internal thing, right from the very beginning, I can say that at Bajaj Allianz, we were very conscious of one fact, and that was that our people are very, very important. And as an insurance company, we deal with people, not just our employees, but intermediaries and customers. So it was always a very, very important topic for us, that how we can improve the way people think about the company. That also helps us in building the brand, but at the same time, people will stick to us either when it comes to the employees or the intermediaries. And I'm really happy to say I have been one of the founding members of this company, and I've continued for almost 20 years now. So, and the same goes with so many of our leaders who have been associated with this company. And it has been one thing very, very clear. It is money that doesn't help you get your employees to continue in the company. It is the overall environment that you provide. And our HR and the CEO has been exemplary in their acts, where they try to give different opportunities to people while they are doing their jobs, but to interact with the different departments so they can enhance their knowledge. At the same time, they feel that there is some value in sticking to it. Now, the pandemic was something which was a very great event, and perhaps a once in a 100-year event that we have seen. But even before that, we have implemented something which I would like to share, that the employees' mental health is extremely important in any organization. And we, perhaps more than 2 years back, we started a counselor, which was the helpline counselor, and we associated him with our company. Anybody can call to that counselor and get the suggestion, the advice as to what it, and there will be no feedback taken from that counselor as to who was approaching what it was. So it was totally between these two, either the employee and the counselor. And that has helped, because the feedback, the numbers we come to know the good number of people are actually approaching, and I'm sure that they will be getting some help. Even during the pandemic, when we saw that a lot of problems were coming, whether it was getting hospital beds, oxygen, or even the vital medicines, we tried to build something which we call saving lives. And by that, we tried to ensure that a person who is needing a bed can go to that app and we can help them as to finding a bed with oxygen or with a ventilator which is nearby. We also procured oxygen concentrators in large numbers and distributed to our various regional offices. And that of course, now the pandemic effect of the second wave is gone down, but then there are already talks about the third wave coming. And I'm sure that these things will help us in mitigating the sufferings of our employees as well as our intermediaries, because all these facilities were also extended to our intermediaries. The customers, whenever we deal with our customers, we try to see that how best we can reduce the paperwork and therefore try to give them the opportunity of interacting through the application or through digital medium, which can help us provide him the much needed claims at the right time. And I'm really proud to say that the grievance ratio, which is a public figure, which is with IRDA, we are the lowest when it comes to the customer's grievance ratio. So I think that is what I would like to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv. Thank you so much. It was very useful, and I'm sure we all benefited from what you said. Okay, now I would like to invite Professor Shantanu Chaudhary. Professor Shantanu Chaudhary, as you know, is the director of IIT Jodhpur, and I would have two specific questions to Professor Chaudhary. First of all, as you know, IITs and similar educational institutes of highest quality in the country, IITs are producing, IITs and IIMs and other similar institutes are producing the future leaders, right? So these future leaders will actually drive businesses, and it is very important, we feel, that the future leaders have an inclination towards ESG while they drive their businesses, while they run their businesses. So my first question to Shantanu would be, how do you see about this demand for ESG trained professionals coming up today, which was not there, of course, in the past? And my second question, which is extremely important, is today, no matter how much managerial action we take, how much initiatives we take, ultimately for things like net zero, or ultimately for things like moving ahead in environment, and also around how we do good to society, we are significantly dependent on technology. Technology plays a very significant role. So today, whether it's coming to battery storage, whether it comes to electric vehicles, whether it comes to carbon capture and storage, or it comes to hydrogen energy, whatever be the case, it all depends on technology. And I'm told that IIT Jodhpur has taken up a very, very important role in this. You have set up a center for emerging technologies, and which is for sustainable development. So all these emerging technologies essentially for targeting towards sustainable development, which is a very, very important role that IIT Jodhpur has taken under your leadership. So Shantanu, I would like you to share your thoughts on both these questions. Thank you, Shantanu. Over to you.
Thank you, Sujit. Thanks for inviting me. I hope I'm audible. Yeah.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So these questions that you posed are extremely important. In fact, when we talk about the future students, and who will actually expected to contribute towards the growth of the business and the industry. Their experience and knowledge about ESG is absolutely critical. And that knowledge today, what we feel, has to be built not through classroom exercises or courses, but it has to be a cultural transformation. And that cultural transformation can only happen through a kind of a participative exercises. In fact, a very interesting experiment could be, and what we are trying to do at IIT Jodhpur, is actually to carry out a campus sustainability campaign, and which actually we are trying to address not just the environmental issue, but social issue as well as governance issue, because it's being run by a team of students and teachers together, addressing all these problems, which also involve the social questions and economic questions of the people in the neighborhood and not just that of the campus. Because a campus, in many cases, an academic institution, has a footprint which disrupted and created problems in the local ecosystem when it got established. So there is a responsibility of the campus also to the social ecosystem. So the point is, an academic institution, therefore, can play a critical role in terms of training the students with the value system of ESG, and across, I'm just talking about many of the academic institutions, which was also stated well in the beginning, that the value of sustainability is getting integrated into an academic culture. The other very important component is today, which has found its way, is professional ethics. And when we discuss about professional ethics, these questions of environment, society, and just governance comes in a very critical way. And therefore, today's, when we are looking at a wholesome education, these factors are not ignored, and we believe that pursuance of these factors would give rise to proper leaders, technology leaders, business leaders, which can really take us through this ESG journey, which is very critical. And it has become very critical with the COVID coming in and teaching us actually the significance of responding to fundamental sustainability values. In terms of technology, I think technology has a very key important role in ensuring sustainability. In fact, even when we talk in terms of digital technologies, actually the entire digital technology creates a carbon footprint which has a very adverse impact if you look at it in an isolated fashion. So the use of digital technology, use of renewable energy, and the other measures which actually optimizes energy usage, everything put together is actually an optimization problem. In fact, technology-wise, this optimization, what we call today optimization in the space of cyber-physical system, is a critical element to ensure technologically sustainability of the environment. So even if I use EV today, and if we are talking in terms of charging of the EV batteries, while charging, if I'm using thermal energy, my carbon footprint almost remains the same. Now, these kind of trade-offs and optimization on these trade-offs is actually the key point in terms of a research for a new technologies evolution. A very simple example is if you today look at, even when we are looking at AI and use of AI, and we know that Amazon came up with kind of an automated CV sorting program where they found a bias to male candidates. Now this, if we are talking about gender equality, then also when I'm using a technology, I need to be absolutely sure about its sustainability, whether it's ensuring equitable rights to the gender or it's getting inherently biased. And another aspect of the sustainability is today there is a huge volume of sustainability reports which are getting generated globally. But analytics based on the sustainability report, which involves data analytics as well as natural language analytics, is absolutely critical to really create the big picture of the ESG adherence and ESG culture adoption across the countries. So therefore, ESG cannot happen without technology intervention. And in fact, it is very important for the investors to look into the investment of those technologies at various spheres, because technology also, although global, the regional power of the technology also gives us a kind of a freedom to pursue the agenda of ESG. So therefore, technology and culture, this is what an academic institution can really build and contribute towards ESG in the business and industry. This is my submission.
Thank you, Shantanu. Thank you. I mean, it was really, really, very briefly you have touched upon so many important aspects as usual. And, you have given the most important and most widely recognized examples also. So thank you so much, Shantanu. The next panelist is, Flavia. Flavia has played, as we have heard, when she was being introduced, very, very important roles. She has played key roles in almost all the, kind of value chains in this journey of ESG. Flavia had the opportunity. I know she has joined a bit late. I know she has told me that she would join a bit late. She had some other pressing commitments, but she had the opportunity to listen to most of the panelists actually. And she has now formed some idea about what's happening in India, the aspect of ESG. So my question to Flavia would be, if you share with us, what do you see happening in Europe, especially businesses, on business cases as well as around regulation? And do you see much difference between how Indian businesses and the other players in the value chain are gearing up as against what you see in Europe? And my second question to you, and I would really like you to answer both the questions, is, you see, there are so many Indian companies who are doing business with European companies. They are either exporting or importing, whatever. They are part of the entire business value chain. So what are those 2 or 3 important things which you will advise to Indian businesses, as to things they should take care of, especially in the area of environmental, social, and governance, to not only retain but enhance their business in Europe, maybe take opportunity, make ESG as an opportunity rather than just risk mitigation, as an opportunity to improve their market share, vis-a-vis, business that Europe does with several other countries. I don't want to name the countries, but several other countries. So Flavia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sudipta. Thank you also for the invitation. I'm very happy to be able to join you, although a bit late, as you mentioned, but also be able to give you a little bit of a perspective as to what's happening in Europe. And yeah, indeed, I've been able to follow some of the speakers, and indeed, I realized that, unsurprisingly, some of the sustainability challenges that you're faced with today are also our challenges here in Europe. And perhaps in order to answer your question, I would like to take a step back and start from answering the question on the challenges, looking at what are the requirements that the European Commission has been working on since the past 6 years, and which is using to inscribe sustainability as part of its capital markets union, which is really, the financial chapter around the way European Union works. And so indeed I would like to stress the fact that, as you mentioned, I've been involved in a number of with a number of stakeholders within the financial life cycle. And of course, that gave me a very interesting perspective of how the needs of companies can be met. At the same time, how can those match the expectations of investors? And today, of course, mostly, how can that fit in with the different policies that policymakers are trying to build in order to match those requirements and build in sustainability within the way that we work. And indeed, as you know, the European Commission strongly supports the transition to a low carbon, more resource efficient and sustainable economy, and has been at the forefront of efforts to build a financial system that supports sustainable growth. And works in this respect has started since the work around the Paris Accord back in 2015, which has really fast forwarded all the efforts on the European side in order to inscribe sustainability as part of how the different players function and work in the economic world. And indeed, that of course has led to a number of initiatives. And on the policy side, it has indeed meant that the European Commission has set up a number of working groups since 2016 in order to help the Commission itself be able to inscribe sustainability within the Capital Markets Union. And indeed, the understanding was that there is a big gap also in terms of finances, that we need to match in order to be able to play an active role in the economy. And actually, how can we be able to match and respond in an adequate way to the climate challenge? And so, of course, the natural question was that the financial sector needs to be involved and needs to play an active role. And so basically, the question was how to scale the investment challenge, making sure that, it is not something that the public sector needs to be faced alone, but how to involve the financial sector. And typically that was to be done, reorienting investments towards more sustainable technologies and businesses, financing growth in a sustainable manner over the long term, and contributing to the creation of a long-term climate resilient and circular economy. And so, everything that the Commission has been doing since then on the legislative side has tried to answer these three questions. And, you've been talking already, some of the speakers were talking about data challenges, taxonomy, etc. And of course, some of you might have heard that the European Commission has been working the development of a taxonomy that has really served the purpose to indeed inscribe or define for investors which are the sustainable activities that that can be chosen in order to promote and fuel the transition economy. And so, of course, that has raised a lot of brows, because indeed it's something that will change forever the way finance as it can be supporting climate change. And at the same time, it brings very closely investors to the real economy. So in the past, I think it's fair to say that when we talked about sustainability and sustainable finance and responsible investment, there were really different understanding as to what different actors meant with regards to that. But I think that the work of the European Commission, specifically with the development of a taxonomy in that respect, is really trying to set clear parameters that can really represent measurable targets for different investors when they choose to fuel the transition economy. And so, that of course is going to change all the dynamics in which investors work, and is going to inevitably mean, and that's answering your second question, that companies have to start facing climate change, and that means, of course, embedding a change into the business model. And so, of course, reacting not only on the business side, but also on the reporting side, making sure that they communicate with investors using, for instance, the taxonomy, as I was saying, to demonstrate that they're able to indeed play a role with their business model and their activities that is actually, a carbon-friendly way of devising their own ecosystems. And so, indeed, that's, of course, going to change substantially the way investors work, because it's really determining a level playing field with a series of benchmarks and labels determining what is a sustainable investment, which so far, I think it's fair to say, nobody has really attempted to do, because the industry has also been very happy to promote different ways in which sustainable investments can be constructed, and so different distributors and different market players were not really referring to one standard, but they were referring to different kind of standards. But today, we see that with the change that the taxonomy will bring, there is more an alignment with regards to what we mean when we talk about sustainable investment. And another very important regulation in that respect that is also determining a shift in the way companies work. It's the Sustainability Financial Disclosure Directive, which is in turn going to push financial market participants to communicate on the way that they're able to embed taxonomy considerations into their financial products. And that is really, a test that, the financial market players will have to perform on their products, speaking with their clients to be able to match specific parameters, and they're going to have to prove that with specific KPIs. So we are seeing a very big picture of a system that in the past has been vaguely using some sustainability benchmark indicators and terms that's becoming now more clear in terms of determining what we mean with sustainable finance, what we mean with ESG, and also helping retail investors that are maybe less savvy about not only about the financial system in general, but also the sustainable finance system to understand how they can play a role and how to be able to recognize a specific financial product. I don't know if I answered both your questions, but.
Yeah, Flavia, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, I think that ends the first round of question and response from all the panelists. Unfortunately, what has happened is, we are already late. We have crossed our budget timeline that was given to me by ASSOCHAM. So I don't think we'll have a chance to ask the second round of question to any panelist. And I'm very happy that this topic has generated so much of interest among the panelists, among the audience, that that actually we miscalculated the time. We should have actually given much more time, and possibly we'll do one more session on this topic which would be more like more detailed discussion. This particular and to sum up, what I see and what I hear, this is a very encouraging message which I'm getting. All of us are getting actually from all the players in the the ESG value system. Heard about what the government is doing, to start with. Then we heard from the industries. We heard from the consultants, we have heard from the banks, we have heard from the insurance companies, we have heard from the people, the academicians who are providing us with the ESG trained future leaders who are going to help technology, which is so much important for any ESG achievement. And we have also heard from someone who has played so important role in Europe in the entire value chain of ESG. So another important thing is, all of them, almost all of them, not all, have been my colleagues, and I've worked with them for several years, either with them professionally as a consultant with their company, or, with them together as a part of the consulting industry. So it's very happy that, to hear from all of them of the good work they're doing. Alka, Surojit, as I mentioned, Shailesh has been, Shailesh, of course, we worked together for so many years. Shankar, Shantanu Chaudhary. Shantanu happens to be a very good friend of mine. And of course, Flavia. Flavia, we have worked together in Europe for many years with Flavia. So it's very reassuring to hear from all of you about what's happening in your markets, what's happening, what you see in your industries, and how industries are gearing up. So I think I will now open the session to questions, to the audience, to the delegates. And as I said, if you can ask the question, if you have a question specifically to any particular panelist, please mention his or her name, and the question will go to him or her. Otherwise, I'll throw it open to the panel. So I'm waiting to see some questions. So are there questions coming in the chat box?
There are, Sudipta, there are some questions that's come up. There's a couple of questions from Manish, who has asked for examples on the ESG and says, which is the more challenging of the triple bottom line in terms of ROI, which is the biggest challenge?
Okay, that's a great question. And I, though it's open to everyone, so I would actually I will ask Shailesh to take this question, because he has been working with several industries, and possibly based on what he sees as the reaction of industries and businesses, let's hear from Shailesh.
Thank you, Sudipta. Look, in terms of returns, there are two aspects of looking at E and S here. In terms of the lens of impacts, right? I mean, a lot of work has gone into how to measure and manage our impact on people and the planet, right? The whole, if I link it to the whole BRSR requirements on impacts, my questions around this comes down to so much spending is going on, but our business is really making an impact on the beneficiaries, right? The other thing can be how do companies really define this impact? When you're looking at return, it's not, they sometimes just stop at outcomes. What about the impacts and then the returns? How can companies better measure and evaluate the impact of CSR? And what does this mean for corporate strategy, right? These are some of the questions around social. On the environmental side, if you look at, it's still easier, right? It's still easier to measure the impact. But having said that, we have TCFD, where the whole debate has now moved into the climate resilience from climate mitigation. We can also see what's happening with TFND, where you're looking at nature, the nature capital, how you can really look into that. That's brilliant. But look, my question here always comes down to the impact valuation, and it's very important that companies move ahead of the traditional disclosures and reporting frameworks. They should really try to integrate external factors into the business model. For example, how you're looking at climate change, how you can measure it in terms of CO2 emitted, right? But what's the impact on human health, right? How you can measure that on the number of people. So these are some of my observation. I'm conscious of time, but look, impacts, the language of impacts can come in that will really change the game when it comes to the whole returns. Over to you, Sujit. Thank you. Thanks, Dal.
So thank you, Shailesh. There is one question from Mr. Suresh, and incidentally, this is also addressed to you, Shailesh. It says, Dear Mr. Shailesh, are there any strategies or plans to mitigate the risk of not having ESG experts in banking sector for responsible lending? There are limited resources, and responsible lending has to focus on ESG performance of the investing company. So, Shailesh, though it is addressed to you, but I think I would rather pass on the question, to start with. Maybe I'll come back to you. I'll pass on the question to Amit, who is the expert from the banking sector. And Amit, if you would like to take the question.
Sorry, I was not clear. What was the context of the question? I understand the development financial part, but what was the context of the question?
So I'm just reading the question, Amit.
Yeah.
It says, are there any strategies or plans to mitigate the risk of not having ESG experts in banking sector for responsible lending? as there are limited resources and responsible lending has to focus on ESG performance of the company. So, the question is a lack of having, proper professionals possibly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great question. I think I mentioned that as one of those challenges that we have, over a period of time, most banks have built large credit risk portfolios without actually the kind of focus that it really deserves in terms of the whole, the ESG risk assessment. And today, when the whole world is talking about ESG, we suddenly find that we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough expertise, etc. So right now, if you ask me, hand on heart, largely the traditional risk models are what are getting used with a little bit of an overlay to deal with, let's say, climate risk, floods, risk assessment around some of those ESG, etc. But these are not what I would call hard-coded, in the traditional sense. So that's one part of it. The second is this whole environmental risk rating itself is a new phenomena. It's untested in the global context, even in the Indian context to some extent. It's just about getting imbibed within the banking system. So it will need some time for it to kind of look at how does this environmental risk rating, which is nothing but basically taking into fact all factors related to some lending around the whole ESG risk embedded into the lending decision cycle itself. And the third element of this is, the whole awareness factor. Today, even if I were to kind of outsource this to experts, there are very limited experts who can actually go back and, give this information back for me to take the decision. And just to complete that loop, and of course, this is an industry body in that sense, the level of awareness at corporates itself in terms of will it make a difference, on my ability to borrow is not yet tested to the extent. Let's say today, I know we keep hearing one of, this lender has not funded because of these environmental reasons, ESG reasons, etc. In the global context, and honestly, so foreign banks are a lot more proactive in some of these thought processes are getting imbibed in the Indian banking system, not yet hard coded across. I don't know if any bank really refuses a loan because of, yes, there are, like we said, we have lending policies, we put those policies together, those sustainable lending practices, go, no go, is part of that exercise, but it's just a start. We've not reached a stage where somebody's actually saying no. You've seen that, let's say in the last 72 hours, you've seen a couple of foreign banks actually pulling the plug on some large transactions on account of these risks. The Indian system is getting used to it. Will take some time, but surely, we see that happening more and more, increased awareness. And I think just to kind of complete that loop, it's also going back to the fact that the investors and the stakeholders are also demanding the same from the banks to say that why are you not pulling the plug? And that's how I see that loop getting completed, in terms of how are we trying to work around the model to ensure that we still kind of cover those ESG risks.
Sure. Thanks, Amit. So I'll now, ask Shailesh to respond to this question because the question was addressed to you originally. Shailesh, I will slightly modify the question when I ask it to you. The question was around, non-availability of proper trained ESG professionals or resources. So while that is true for the banking sector, I think it is true across several sectors. And now I know it is very, very true for the consulting sector. I know how much challenges the consulting industry is facing, and all over. I think it is not today. Even 10 years back, we had the same challenges, Shailesh, if you recollect. So how do you react to this? And how do you see, this demand and supply gap in terms of trained professionals of ESG is going to be met? Or what action you are doing or ENY is doing to mitigate this particular challenge?
No, it's a great question. And some of the challenges, look, I mean, I'll answer this question in 3 bits. The first bit would be in terms of how we are looking at the whole investor ESG maturity path. If you look at it, has changed from traditional investment to ESG risk mitigator, right? Then it's more around ESG opportunity seeker. And what we are seeing now is more around impact investing. And when we look at impact investing, then we are looking at where the value is created, and then it comes down to impact measurement. Now, in terms of capability, look, definitely I mean, there are three areas where the demand is in this space at the moment. One is, of course, the private equity space, impact investing space, where the work we are doing comes down to we'll have someone who has led responsible investment practice, who is strong on due diligence, who has looked at right from the buyer side down to the exit around pre-transaction, post-transaction, in terms of the buyer side due diligence and all, and we are looking at that, and so that's one element. That's very niche, and the team we have are people from that background. They bring in strong subject matter knowledge and very strong industry knowledge. So that's one. Moving on in terms of overall, to answer your question, Sudipta, it comes down to what we are trying to do. If we are trying to work on ESG and say resilience, the missing R of ESG, as I see, as we have discussed, we try to bring in people. We'll go into the governance experts. We'll go into tax transparency. We'll go to the tax experts, and we'll bring in that wider team. And being at EY helps, right? The skill set is there. How we bring in people, bringing in different expertise. It's no longer the domain where look at decarbonization. Just as a quick example, decarbonization is not just about looking at emission inventory report, energy consumption, energy production, greenhouse gas emission, as per a principle-based ISO 14641, right? It's not just that. The journey you take from there down to, say, a net zero target, just as an example, requires you to forecast. You should have modeling capability. You need to really understand the PI space, how you really come up with a robust emission management and reduction plan, how you can bring in the blue hydrogen, the new energy side of it, CCUs, the techno-commercial analysis. So we are trying to bring in people from different skill set and then serving the market. In terms of reaching out, getting the right people, it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. But look, understanding the requirement, having a clear understanding of what we want to deliver, then I think it's more about going in, picking up those experts from the market who initially we think they don't understand, but look, if you have interactions with them, they understand, and we just need to bring them up to speed sometimes. So that's my response to that. Thank you.
Shailesh, thanks. There is one more question, very interesting question, and this is from, I think this is a very relevant question, very relevant question, and this is from Mr. Vishwas Chaudhary. And the question is, there are numerous ESG framework like IFC, ESME, ISO, CDC, etc. Sustainability reporting framework like GRI, SASB, TCFD, etc., etc. ESG benchmarking like S&P, DJSI. Can you suggest, as per the Indian context, which one is preferable? It is not, they have not mentioned, she has not mentioned the name of any panelist. So I think, I will probably pass it on to Surojit. If you would like to, answer this question, Surojit.
If I get the question, thank you. If I get the question right, what policies are being implemented and on ESG, is that right?
No. The question is, Surojit, I'm reading the question.
Yeah, please.
I'm reading the question.
Yeah.
The question is, there are numerous ESG framework like IFC, ESME, ISO, CDC, etc. There are frameworks of sustainability reporting like GRI, SASB, TCFD, etc. There are ESG benchmarking, or rather rating, like DJSI, MSCI, etc. Can you suggest, as per the Indian context, which one of these are preferable?
Okay, thank you so much. So, I really do not know, what kind of a organization the gentleman or lady who has asked the question from belongs to. I'm assuming that it's an Indian business. Okay. So if that is the case, while there are a number of frameworks, I think where the requirement is to, let us say, demonstrate to the stakeholders the kind of diligence on ESG issues, I think one should look at a simple framework around that rather than trying to choose from multiple and many. For example, if the requirement is to, sort of raise funds from a bank that follows IFC performance standards, of course, you would have to go and do IFC performance standards. Otherwise, my suggestion would be to just start with a simple, maybe ISO 14,000 kind of a framework, and look at very simple IFC EHS guidance or World Bank EHS guidance. And of course, our regulations, which are already there in terms of the Central Pollution Control Board, etc. I think that should suffice as a start. And of course, one can do reporting and so on and so forth. But a simple start I have seen always helps, and this is what we tell our suppliers also, in the supply chain, that start simple and then, as you grow, you can grow in excellence, different frameworks. Hope that answers.
Yeah. If I could add on, Sujit.
Yeah, please.
So I know it's a common question that comes in for Indian companies. Where do you start with? And then you, like we mentioned, you have challenges in mapping vis-a-vis the sustainable developmental goals. And then you might get into the GRI framework, which some people say is passé. And then of course the UN Global Compact, and you mentioned the CDP, and there is the BRSR that's come in now. And of course, mature companies would then get into integrated reporting. So all of these are very similar. All roads lead to Rome. The Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, I think all of them are very similar. So I guess the important thing is for any company to start with, if it is at the starting point of this journey, to do the materiality, to do the assessment, to then look at the goals.
Shankar, we lost you. Shankar, we can't hear you.
Shankar, we can't hear you.
Again, but I guess it's all about materiality, identifying based on the caps, what are the next steps, and I guess then take that call.
Shankar, and thanks, Shirojit, for responding. And I'm tempted to add my two penny. My two penny on this would be, while I agree with what Shankar has said and Shirojit has said, my two penny would be to look at, who are your stakeholders? Who, is the person, if I'm developing a framework, what are the drivers for developing the frameworks? Of course, material issues keep on changing. Today, what my material issue is, 2 years down the line, material issue is going to be different. So can I develop a framework which can take care of not only my today's material issues, but also what I see possibly are going to be, in the short term, in the short run, maybe 2 years, 3 years down the line, or maybe in the medium term. When it comes to reporting, I think it's very important to understand who the audience is going to be, who the reader is going to be, who the principal reader is going to be. I know, if I talk about stakeholders, there's a whole list of stakeholders, but really all stakeholders, if you do a prioritization from your point of view, who are those top 2 or 3 stakeholders, for your business at this point of time? Develop the reporting framework based on what your stakeholders are, what they're demanding. I think that's very important. And last but not the least, you talked about ESG rating agencies. And of course, rating agencies, they all have a very similar rating framework, but not the same. They are also different from each other. So don't bother about, when you rating agency is something that you look into when you are investing into an investing company. All right. As far as your own rating is concerned, let it be rated by whoever is the rating agency preferred by the investor, or preferred by the customer, for the point of view. So I think there is no one answer, to be very honest. And Mr. Vishwas Chaudhary, who asked you the question, So frankly, I think all three of us have tried to discuss about what could be the ways of selecting the framework and reporting, as well as your rating, ESG rating or benchmark agency. Thank you.
Sujit, can I maybe add?
Yes, please.
So maybe an interesting notion I can add to that is something that has been developed by the European Commission, in support to assisting how companies should report. And that's really a follow-up to what you've been saying in terms of materiality matrix and materiality work, as it focuses on a concept of double materiality. And that's, I think, something that can also help companies more understanding how they place themselves within the value chain around sustainability, because it's not only looking at how climate change is impacting the business model, but it's also looking at how the company is impacting climate. And so, of course, that's more of interest to the wider stakeholders rather than purely financial investors. But I think it's an important notion that we are seeing being picked up, in the way that the European Commission is devising its new regulatory approach to support again companies in their reporting. And personally, I think that it adds a lot of value, always with that frame of mind, as you mentioned, to understand where you are and how the kind of relationship and impact changes and evolves over time.
Thank you, Flavia. That was very important, and I think we have all learned about it. And I think that possibly brings us to the end of the panel discussion, because we don't have any other question. If I'm not, let me just check if I have any other question. No, there is no other question. So I think we have answered all the questions. So I would now hand over the responsibility to Parminder and ASSOCHAM. Over to you, Parminder.
Yes, distinguished guests and participants, on behalf of ASSOCHAM, I have the pleasure of giving the vote of thanks. First of all, to begin with, the topic of ESG is very commendable, as we know, because every step of our journey, it impacts our very existence. The corona pandemic, which has brought about the sustainability crisis, has brought this 21st century, pulled forward. The ESG stands by years in a matter of few months. So it is an opportune moment for all of us to be enlightened and educated by this webinar. We thank Sujit Bajpayee, Joint Secretary, Environment and Climate Change, Government of India, for taking time out from his busy schedule and sharing his valuable views, which I think is very rewarding, because now we have the insight of the government's perspective. Next, we have to thank Mr. Karan Agarwal. He is the co-chairman, ASSOCHAM, National Council, SEZ, IT Parks and Warehousing, for his welcome address. Mr. B.A. Chandak, Executive Director, RPG Group, for sharing his views on how the scenario is gaining traction in India. And again, Mr. Mitesh Pandya and Mr. Narola for their views about the education sector, which I think is very important, because education sector plays a very vital role It instills the values of responsibility, transparency, accountability, integrated with the learning lessons for future practice. So these are the mantras of ESG. It is also getting us the livelihood and the entry into the corporate and business world. And subsequently, it impacts the global economy. I have to thank the very knowledgeable panel, Mr. Shurojit Bose, Mr. Shantanu Chaudhary, Mr. Shankar R, Ms. Flavia Milakolta, I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrong, and Mr. Rajiv Kumar for his wonderful, enlightening discourse. And I would like to thank Dr. Shantanu Chaudhary, and also a very big thank you to Mr. Sujit Das for mentoring this important event and also giving his valuable contribution to make this a success. So, and lastly, ASSOCHAM thanks the audience for their participation. This webinar has created an awareness about the message, and I hope this awareness will turn into action. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you all. And let's switch on our cameras and have a group photograph of this elite audience and a great occasion. All cameras, please. Switch on the cameras, folks. Let's end with a beautiful group snap. And let's say ESG together. Thank you, folks.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you
Thanks
so
for the
much.
opportunity. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Stay safe.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks to Sujit Das. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you again, Sujit.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.